The day her U.S. visa was approved, that was the day our marriage ended. It was the happiest day of her life and the beginning of the end for me. It cost me exactly $150,500 and a condo in Chicago to finally understand one thing. Our wedding wasn't the start of our life together. It was the final step in her business plan. $158,500. I say the number because it's real. It's not a vague estimate. It's the precise, itemized cost of my re-education. And every single dollar was a line item in a strategy I was too blind to see because I desperately wanted to believe in the story she was telling. For 40 years, I built a successful business on one skill: reading people. I could spot a bad deal from a mile away. I could tell you if a contractor was cutting corners just by the tone of his voice. I built my entire life on being the guy who saw the angles nobody else did. But I couldn't see that I wasn't being courted as a husband. I was being acquired as an asset, a key to a door she wanted to unlock in America. She never raised her voice. She never seemed greedy. Every request for money, and there were many, was perfectly packaged as a crisis, a family emergency, a small investment for our future together. And I played my part. I was the provider, the protector, the American man who could solve any problem with a simple wire transfer. It's a powerful role to play, especially when you're lonely. It feels an awful lot like love, but it's not. It's a transaction. And the most chilling part is that when the transaction is complete, the partnership is immediately dissolved. The mask doesn't just slip, it's taken off and put away because it's no longer needed. To understand how a man who prided himself on his common sense could walk straight into a trap this obvious, I have to go back to the beginning. Back to a quiet house in Indiana and the decision that started it all. Before all this happened, I was Frank Miller from Fort Wayne, Indiana. For 40 years, I ran Miller & Sons HVAC. It was my name on the side of the van. I built that company from a single truck and a box of tools into a business that employed 24 people. I wasn't a Wall Street guy playing with paper. I built things. I installed the systems that kept people warm in the winter and cool in the summer. It was an honest living, and I was good at it. When I finally sold the company to a larger firm, I walked away with a clean conscience and a comfortable nest egg. After everything was settled, I had about $750,000 in the bank and a family home that was completely paid off. I wasn't rich, but I was secure. I had played the game right, and I had won. But winning the game and knowing what to do after the final whistle are two very different things. My marriage had ended 8 years earlier. It was one of those slow, quiet dissolutions, no big fights, just a gradual drifting apart until we were strangers living in the same house. My kids were grown, successful, with families of their own, and my house, the one I had worked so hard for, just got quieter and bigger every year. The silence in that place was deafening. I'd go from room to room, and it was like a museum of a life someone else had lived. I went from being Frank the boss and dad to just Frank, an old guy in an empty house. You start to feel invisible. You walk into a store and people look right through you. You're no longer part of the conversation. My purpose had been to build, to provide. And once that was done, I had no blueprint for what came next. The night it all shifted was a Tuesday. I was supposed to have my weekly dinner with my son, but he had to cancel. A last-minute work thing. I understood, of course. His career was taking off, and I was proud of him. But when I hung up the phone, the silence in the house was heavier than usual. So I did what lonely people do. I opened my laptop and just started drifting. I ended up on YouTube, watching videos about guys my age who had moved abroad, and then I found the videos about Prague. It was like watching a fantasy. The stunning old buildings, the cobblestone streets, the sense of history, and the videos all said the same thing. It was a place where a man like me, a traditional man, was still respected. A place where the women were beautiful, yes, but also down-to-earth, family-oriented. They weren't looking for a handout, they were looking for a partner. I watched for hours. I saw a vision of a life where I wasn't invisible anymore. I could be a provider again, a protector. All my years of hard work, the very things that made me successful in America, but now seemed irrelevant, could mean something again over there. I've always been a practical man. When a furnace is broken, you don't just stare at it. You diagnose the problem and you find a solution. My problem was loneliness. My solution, it seemed, was on the other side of the Atlantic. I convinced myself this wasn't an emotional decision. It was a strategic one. I was taking everything I had built, my resources, my experience, and I was reinvesting it into a new life. I was still the same sharp, no-nonsense businessman. I could spot a bad deal a mile away. The irony is, I thought I was approaching this like a project, inspecting all the angles, but I never once considered that I wasn't the one running the project. I was just the material being used to build someone else's dream. I started treating my loneliness like a business problem, a system that wasn't performing. And what do you do with a system that isn't performing? You analyze the data and you change the inputs. The input was my location. The data, it seemed, was all pointing east. I didn't just dream about Prague, I started building a business case for it. I opened a spreadsheet, just like I would if I was quoting a big commercial job. On one side, I listed my assets and income. My Social Security and the monthly draw from my investments came to about $4,000. In Fort Wayne, that was comfortable. But in Prague, it was a different world. I spent hours on websites that broke down the cost of living. I saw that a nice modern apartment in a good neighborhood like Vinohrady or Dejvis might cost 25,000 Czech crowns a month. I did the math. That was around $1,100, a fraction of what a similar place would cost in any major U.S. city. A monthly transit pass for their incredible public transport system, about $25, a 3-course meal at a good local restaurant, $15, maybe $20. My $4,000 a month there wasn't just comfortable, it was leverage. It was power. It meant I would never have to worry about money, which freed me up to focus on the real objective, building a life. I joined a half-dozen Facebook groups for American expats in the Czech Republic. And my God, the stories were intoxicating. Guys my age, guys older than me, holding beer glasses with Prague Castle in the background, talking about their new lives. They talked about the slower pace, the respect they received, the feeling of safety. Of course, there were some warning posts, people who had trouble with bureaucracy, people who got scammed. But I read those posts and I thought, that's not me, they were careless, they didn't do their homework. I saw their mistakes as proof that my careful, methodical approach was the right one. I looked into the visa process. It seemed complicated, sure. A long-stay visa, a Zivno or trade license as a path to residency. It was a maze of paperwork. But I dealt with city permits and zoning commissions for 40 years. Bureaucracy didn't scare me. It was just a cost of doing business, a series of boxes to check. I told myself that any man who was serious would see it as a hurdle, not a roadblock. The weak ones would give up. The smart ones, the ones who really wanted it, would find a way through. And I was one of the smart ones. I had a lifetime of evidence to prove it. In my mind, the decision was made. It wasn't rash. It was the most logical, well-researched decision I had made in years. I was taking a depreciating asset, my life in Indiana, and I was moving it to a market where it could grow. I was about to execute the perfect plan. I sold my house, put my life into a few suitcases, and landed in Prague on a Tuesday in early May. And for the first month, every single thing that happened confirmed I had made the best decision of my life. The air was different. The sounds were different. The quiet hum of the trams, the cobblestones under my feet in the old town square. It was like I had stepped out of a black and white world and into color. My $4,000 a month felt like a fortune. I rented a beautiful, fully furnished one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood called Šmíchov, 5 minutes from a metro station. It cost me 19,000 Czech crowns a month. That's about $820. I'd spend more than that on property taxes alone back in Indiana. The loneliness I'd been carrying around for years just evaporated. People talk about the Czechs being reserved, and they are. There isn't a lot of fake smiling. but I saw it as honesty, authenticity. I wasn't invisible here. I was the interesting American man, the one with stories. I felt like I was 25 again, but with a wallet and a lifetime of experience. The plan was working perfectly. I was a man with a purpose again, even if that purpose was just exploring a new city. And then I met Katerina. It was my third week. I was walking through Malá Strana, the lesser town below the castle. It's the postcard version of Prague. I stopped at a little café tucked away on a side street, sat outside, and ordered a coffee. She was my waitress. She was 28, with a smile that wasn't for everyone. But when it was for you, it lit up the whole street. She brought my coffee, and in perfect, almost unaccented English, she asked, "First time in Prague?" We started talking, and for the next hour, she listened. She didn't just hear my words, she seemed to absorb them. I told her about my business, my kids, my life in Indiana, and her eyes never left mine. It was intoxicating. For the first time in a decade, I felt like the most interesting man in the world. She told me her story. She was from a smaller city, Pardubice, working 2 jobs in Prague to send money back to her parents. She talked about her family's struggles, her ambition, her dream of a better life. It wasn't a sob story. She told it with a kind of quiet dignity and a work ethic that reminded me of myself when I was starting out. It resonated with me. I wasn't just some old man with a checkbook. I was a man who understood struggle, who valued hard work. The connection felt immediate and it felt real. When I left that cafe, I was walking on air. I had found it. The life I'd seen in those videos, the respect, the connection. It was all real. I told myself this was it. This was the reward for 40 years of hard work. I saw her story of struggle and her intense focus on me as proof of her character. It never once occurred to me that a story could also be a tool, that a person could study a target and tell them exactly the story they needed to hear. I wasn't falling in love with a person. I was falling in love with a perfectly crafted reflection of my own needs. We started talking every day. The time difference was a killer, 7 hours ahead in Prague, but it worked. I'd wake up and there'd be a good morning message from her. I'd go to bed just as her workday was ending. It created this little bubble for us, separate from the rest of the world. After 6 months of this, I flew back. This time, it wasn't an exploratory trip. I wasn't a tourist. I was going to see my girl, and that's what it felt like. She met me at the airport. The way she ran to me, the way she held me, it erased every doubt. It washed away every lonely night I had ever spent in that big empty house in Indiana. We spent 2 weeks together that were a blur of happiness. I felt like I was back in the driver's seat of my own life. She was perfect, attentive, affectionate, and she never asked for a thing. She insisted on splitting meals, even though my $4,000 a month was more than she made in half a year. It was all the proof I needed. This wasn't about my money. This was real. One night we were walking across the Charles Bridge. The castle was lit up on the hill. The city was sparkling. I looked at her, and all I could think was, I'm 63 years old. I don't have time to waste. I've built things my whole life. You see a plan, you see the goal, and you execute. You don't stand around talking about it. So I asked her to marry me, right there, and she said yes. We had a simple civil ceremony at the old town hall a few days later. It was just us, 2 witnesses, and a translator. It was the proudest moment of my life. I had fixed the problem. I had solved my loneliness. I had a wife. Now, all I had to do was get her home. The project was officially underway. I knew the immigration process was a beast. They call it a CR-1 Spousal Visa, a mountain of paperwork designed to prove your marriage is legitimate. I saw it as my first real test as her husband, and I was going to ace it. I told her, "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll handle all of it." The first thing I did was hire the best immigration lawyer I could find, a $15,000 retainer. I saw it as insurance. You don't try to wire a 20-ton commercial cooling unit yourself. You hire the best crew you can find to make sure it's done right. This was no different. Then came the application fees, the medical exams in Prague, the cost of getting every official document she had translated and certified. Another $10,000 disappeared from my account. I barely blinked. In my mind, this was just the cost of entry. An investment in our future. You spend money to make money. Here, I was spending money to build a life. It was the most important project I'd ever managed. The first crack in the foundation appeared about 2 months after the wedding. I got a call from her. She was in tears, barely able to speak. Her mother, she said, had collapsed. She needed an urgent surgery, something the public health insurance in the Czech Republic wouldn't fully cover. There was a waiting list for the public option, she explained, but the doctor said they couldn't wait. They needed to go to a private clinic. The cost was 220,000 Czech crowns. I immediately opened a currency converter on my computer. It came back at just under $10,000. $10,000. My mind went into provider mode. This wasn't a scam. This was a crisis. This was my wife's family, my family now. What kind of man would I be if I let my new mother-in-law suffer to save 10 grand? This was my chance to be the hero, to show them all that she had married a man who could protect them, a man who could solve problems. I told her to send me the wire information for the clinic. She protested, just a little. No, Frank, it's too much. But I insisted. It felt good to insist. It felt powerful. 2 hours later, the money was on its way. That night, I went to sleep feeling like the best husband in the world. I didn't just buy a solution, I bought a feeling. The feeling of being needed, of being the man with the answers. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a very long time, and $10,000 felt like a bargain for it. I was so busy playing the part of the protector that I never stopped to ask for a single piece of paper from that hospital. I never even got the doctor's name. After that, the floodgates didn't open, but a slow, steady leak began. The visa process, we were told, would take about 18 months, a year and a half. That's a long time to be separated, and a lot can happen in a year and a half. The requests for money were never large, and they were always brilliantly packaged. It was a masterclass in salesmanship. 1 month, it was her brother. He worked as a delivery driver and his car broke down. Without it, he'd lose his job. The repair was 60,000 crowns. I did the math, about $2,500. It was a simple business decision. He needed the car to work, so he could support the family, which meant Katerina wouldn't have to worry. I sent the money. I was investing in stability. A few months later, there was a big storm. It damaged the roof of her family's home in Pardubice. She sent me pictures. It looked legitimate. The quote for the repair was 120,000 crowns, about $5,000. I'd spent more than that fixing a leaking pipe in an apartment building back in Fort Wayne. It was a maintenance cost. You have an asset, you have to maintain it. In my mind, her family was now part of my portfolio. I sent the money. Each time, the gratitude was overwhelming. The phone calls, the loving messages, the promises of how she would spend the rest of her life making it up to me when she finally got to America. Every dollar I sent was met with $100 worth of affection. It was the best return on investment I'd ever seen. The last one was the most clever. About a year into the process, she told me she wanted to be prepared for the American job market. She didn't want to be dependent on me. She wanted to contribute. She found some online courses in digital marketing she could take. She was being proactive. She was ambitious. It reminded me of myself. The cost for the courses and a new laptop powerful enough to run the software was about $2,000. How could I say no to that? I was funding her ambition. I was building her up. I wasn't a sugar daddy. I was a mentor, a partner. So I sent the $2,000. In those 18 months, I never added it all up. Each request, on its own, made perfect sense. It was just a series of small fires, and I was the fireman. That's the job of a husband, I told myself. You take care of your family. My business sense, the one that could sniff out a padded invoice from a subcontractor 50 feet away, was completely offline. It had been replaced by my need to be the man I used to be. The provider. The boss. The guy who could fix anything with a phone call and a wire transfer. I saw myself as a shrewd investor, carefully managing my new life. The truth is, I was a man drilling holes in his own boat because it felt good to plug the leaks. And all the while, I was waiting for that one email from the US government, the one that said, approved. I thought that was the finish line. I thought that was the day my investment would finally pay off. The email from the US government arrived on a Wednesday morning. Subject line, immediate action required. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse. And then I saw it. The word I had been waiting 18 months for. Approved. Our CR-1 Spousal Visa was approved. I felt like I had just closed the biggest deal of my life. I called her immediately, yelling into the phone, "We did it! We did it, baby! It's done!" Her reaction was calm. She said, "Oh, that's good news, Frank, very good." There was no screaming, no crying with happiness. I told myself she was just in shock. The project was finally complete. The asset was secured. But the shift wasn't gradual. It was instant. It was like a switch was flipped. The daily "I love you" messages stopped. The long video calls where she would just look at me? Gone. Our conversations, once full of affection and dreams, became purely logistical. Flights, bank accounts, timelines. Her tone wasn't warm anymore. It was efficient, businesslike. When I asked her what was wrong, why she seemed so distant, she said, "Frank, this is a very stressful time. We have to be practical now." Practical. I held on to that word like a life raft. Of course. She was right. We were just in the final phase of the project. This was just business. I flew her to America. I stood there at the gate at O'Hare, a bouquet of roses in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. And the woman who walked through that door was a stranger. The shy, sweet waitress from Malá Strana was gone. This woman was different. She was confident. Her eyes were hard. She looked right past me, scanning the airport like she was looking for an exit. She gave me a quick, stiff hug, the kind you give a distant relative at a funeral. The roses I was holding felt ridiculous. She didn't even look at them. The drive back to Indiana was silent. I tried to make small talk, point out landmarks. She just stared out the window. I assumed she was tired, jet-lagged. When we got to my home in Fort Wayne, the home I had imagined us living in together, she stood in the doorway and didn't move. She looked around the living room, at my comfortable furniture, at the pictures of my kids on the wall. And then she said, "I cannot live here." I laughed. "It's a little different from Prague, I know, but we'll make it our own." "No," she said, her voice flat. "I will not live in Indiana. I will live in Chicago." I was stunned. Chicago? Why? We never talked about Chicago. "There is a big Czech community there," she said, as if explaining something to a child. "There are opportunities. My life is not going to be in this quiet place." I should have seen it right then. I should have turned around, put her in a taxi, and driven her right back to the airport. But I didn't. I had already invested too much. 18 months. Tens of thousands of dollars. A marriage. To admit I was wrong now meant admitting the entire project was a failure, so I did what I always do. I tried to fix it with money. I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to prove I could still provide, so I agreed. A week later, we were in Chicago, looking at condos. She picked out a sleek, modern one-bedroom in a high-rise. The down payment was $100,000. I wrote the check without flinching. Another investment, I told myself. A final one to secure our future together. She moved in. I kept my house in Indiana, driving to Chicago on the weekends. For 4 months I tried. I tried to connect with the stranger who was now my wife. But she was always busy. She was building a network, she said, taking online classes, meeting people from the Czech community. My calls would go to voicemail. My texts would get one-word answers hours later. She was building a life in America, and I was not a part of it. The end came on a Saturday morning. I had driven up to surprise her. I let myself into the condo, the one my money had paid for. She was on the phone, speaking in rapid-fire Czech. She didn't see me. She was laughing, a bright, genuine laugh I hadn't heard since we were in Prague. When she hung up, she finally saw me standing there. The smile vanished. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I live here, remember?" I said. "We're married." And then she said the words, "Frank, this is not working. I am not happy." She told me I was too controlling because I had started asking where the money I was giving her for living expenses was going. She said I didn't understand her need for independence. She wanted a divorce. 4 months. 4 months after landing in America, the business plan was complete, and I finally understood. I wasn't her husband. I was immigration. I was a bank. I was the key to the door, and once the door was open, the key was no longer needed. The divorce was clean, efficient. She had a plan for that too. I sold the condo in Chicago. After the legal fees and the cost of selling, I took a $14,000 loss on it. When you add that to the $100,000 down payment, the $25,000 in lawyer and visa fees, the $10,000 for her mother's surgery and all the other little emergencies, the final bill for my education came to $158,500. I'm back in Indiana now, not in my old house. I sold that too. Couldn't stand the silence anymore. I live in a small apartment. It's quiet here, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's the quiet of starting over. I'm 63 years old, and my retirement account is a lot lighter than it was 3 years ago, but I'm not broken. I'm just educated, and I want to share the lessons I paid for so you don't have to. Here's the first one, the golden rule. Never ever send money for a crisis you cannot personally verify. If her mother is sick, you get on a plane. You fly to Prague, you take a train to Pardubice, you go to the hospital, and you talk to the doctor yourself. You get the bill in your own hand. If you are not physically standing there, looking at the problem with your own eyes, the emergency isn't real. It's an audition to see if you're a good mark. I paid $10,000 for that lesson. Second, you have to understand what the visa process really is. From the moment you file that paperwork, it is a one-way river of your money, your time, and your hope, and it all flows away from you. For 18 months, I was pouring everything I had into a bucket I couldn't see. You have to treat every dollar you spend on it, the lawyers, the fees, the translations, as a high-risk investment that you must be prepared to lose. Until she is in your country, living in your home, and has been your partner there for at least a year, you have zero proof of her real intentions. And that brings me to the final, most important lesson. The moment that visa is approved is your final exam. It is the moment of truth. If her behavior changes, even a little bit, if the affection cools off, if the calls stop, if the conversation suddenly shifts from us to me and my needs, you have to see it for exactly what it is. You weren't in a partnership. You were a milestone on her project plan. And now that you're complete, she's moving on to the next phase. If you see that switch, you cut your losses right then and there. Do not get on the plane. Do not go to the airport. And for the love of God, do not buy the condo. I'm not saying you can't find happiness with a foreign woman, but if you're an older man with a retirement account, you are a target. You have to be smarter than I was. Before you wire $1, before you sign one visa application, you must ask yourself, is she in love with me or with the country I live in? And if you have any doubt at all, you walk away. Don't end up like me. If this story can save even one man from making my mistake, it was worth telling. Subscribe to this channel. We're sharing the lessons you need to learn before it's too late.